That's a sure pleasure to see all of you, and we're missing several, but we're glad to have all of us here tonight. Since it's the first Wednesday night of the month, we do things in a reverse order, as you know. So we'll have our class first, and somewhat abbreviated class, and then have our songs, reading, and afterwards, you know. We'll go through our reading fairly briefly. Tonight we had Exodus 28 through Leviticus, the 7th chapter, and I want to remember, not the 20, did I say the 28th? I meant the 36th chapter. I was looking at my wrong, I knew that. The 36th chapter through the 40th in the Leviticus, the first 7 chapters. In that section of Exodus, what is being discussed? That's right. If you want to think about the instructions, I think we mentioned this Sunday morning, the instructions for the tabernacle in 25 through 31, 32, 34, the kind of the interim with the golden calf, and 35 through 40, the construction of the tabernacle. So instructions and construction of it, and that's what we have in these final chapters. If you'll notice in chapter, if I can get my Bible turned, into chapter 36, what is being constructed there? What's being made? And primarily, not the furniture, but what? The curtains, the boards, the bars, the externals of the tabernacle. And then in chapter 37, what do we find here? Making what? The ark, the table, the table of showbread, the candlestick. And then in 38, the making of the outer what? Outer court. And then in 39, specifically the what's mentioned there early on. The priestly garments, the ephod, and other things that would go along with the priest's garments. And then in 40, what happens? That's right. The tabernacle is reared up, and what is special about it? God's what? God's glory. That's right. You'll notice look at verse 34 of chapter 40. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting. The glory of Jehovah filled the tabernacle. Moses was not able to enter into the tent of meeting because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of Jehovah filled the tabernacle. And when the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel went onward and throughout all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they journeyed not till the day it was taken up. For the cloud of Jehovah was upon the tabernacle by day, and fire therein by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. So God directed their affairs through his movement, and they would move, and then his presence was seen in a very physical way there over and in the tabernacle. His glory filled it. Would it be truthful to say that his glory fills the church today? I believe it does. The glorious church is mentioned in Ephesians, the 5th chapter. That he should wash it with the washing, that he should cleanse it with the washing of water with the word, that it might be a glorious church. And that's what it is when people are doing right. God's physical glory and the brightness of all that really was a type of the brightness and the light of the character of Christians in the New Testament. I think that's how there would be a tie. That's right. That's exactly right. All right. Leviticus is about what? The law, the book of the law of the priest. And Leviticus makes the point really through the first 16, 17 chapters that it takes sacrifice to come to the Lord. It takes offerings to come to the Lord. And then 18 through the end, it takes holiness to maintain a relation with the Lord. It's interesting how these books in the Old Testament, even in their arrangement, epitomize the whole scheme of redemption. here we are as sinners. We need the sacrifice of Christ to be able to come to God. But then once we've come to God, he who believes and is baptized shall be saved, or Matthew's account, teach them, baptize them, then teach them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, living a righteous life. And that's exactly what Leviticus is about. So we've got a number, from 1 through 7, we have various offerings given. And then in 8, 9, and 10, the consecration of the priest. What's given in chapter 1? Law of burnt offerings. 2, grain, also called meal. 3, peace. 4, sin. 5, trespass. 6, trespass, and then the priest work, the meal offerings and sin offerings, and some of the specifics about them. In 7, we have, again, what? The trespass and the priest work in all of this, and then the eating of the peace offerings. Okay, so we don't get bogged down. I remember when I was trying to get more serious about the Bible, I was reading through Leviticus. If you don't have an overall view of what the book is about, you can get lost in the weeds of Leviticus. And but it has a tremendous lessons it has. But you know, in the details, one thing I've made a kind of a simpler point. The fact that God showed there were various kinds of sacrifices, it shows one thing, and that is that there are a lot of ways we can do wrong. There are a lot of ways we can sin. And a lot of these various sacrifices were for specific trespasses, specific sins. Sometimes the word trespass means some special or specific kind of sin. Sin more of a generic violation of God's will. That's not always the case, but sometimes it is. Yes, sir. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the Day of Atonement took care of some of that too. Exactly. Yes, sir.
To me, it shows how precise God is about His worship.
Yes.
It's not what we think is right or haphazard. He's specific about everything we need to do to please Him.
Exactly. Yeah. All of these are details that they were to carry out. It's interesting, you know. All these are specific details. When we get to Nehemiah, the 9th chapter or 8th chapter, they weren't even doing what? They had one of the annual feasts they weren't even keeping, you know. And so, yes, you're exactly right. It's amazing to me how much people in the world have no clue as to how specific God is. I've thought also, you wonder if God had in mind maybe giving some of the specifics that He might, you know, call out the wheat from the chaff. Remember Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it is impossible to be well pleasing unto God. For he that comes unto God must believe that He is, and that He's a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. Diligently seek Him. And I have wondered if God didn't just give some commandments that He did just to call out who is really wanting to serve me with his whole heart, versus someone who's just, you know, kind of on the fringe. Who knows? But that is what God blesses. Comment or question? Yes, sir. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, Matthew 22. Good. All right, let's move on. We'll have an abbreviated class tonight. And we want to go on and try to finish Nehemiah, the 8th chapter, and we'll see if we can get on into 9. 9 is a long what? Chapter 9 is a long what? A long prayer. It's a long prayer. It's a confession of national sins. Let's go back. We want to remember 1 through 7, basically the building of the wall, and 8, the restoration of the people. And so we read, we dealt with that pretty much in our reading Sunday morning. Ezra reads from the law, and we've asked a question about how many days did this follow the finishing of the wall? Just 3 or 4, maybe 5 at the most, because it was what day of the month did the wall finish? It was the 6th month, and the, what day? I'm looking at 6:15 is your verse. The 6th month, 25th day. And then in this chapter, at the end of chapter 7, the 7th month, and then we'll drop down into verse 2, the 1st day of the 7th month. So you only have, if it were a 28-day month, a lunar month, you only have 3 or 4 days, and you come to this point. All right, so in the first 8 verses, who encourages the people? Is it Nehemiah? It says, what we need to do is have us a reading of the law, and they said, okay, if we have to. Is that how it happened? The people asked Ezra to bring the law, and they had this pulpit of wood that's made. He has people of support behind him, and he stands on, he reads from the book of the law distinctly. He has others who are helping, as we notice down toward the end of the paragraph in verse 8. They read in the book and the law of God distinctly, gave the sense so that they understood the reading. All right, so there's a huge desire to hear the law, and it's obvious that as we mentioned Sunday morning, it's obvious things have been going well. The wall has been built. You've got, encouragement kind of breeds more encouragement. Enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm. And this is what's been going on. Things have been going well. Nehemiah has got them all organized. They build the wall in 52 days. And they stop, and it's like, while we're still on the edge of our seats, let's hear more. Let's hear the word of the Lord. You look like you want to say something.
They didn't just want to hear it. They want to
Understand it. Exactly right. And I think Brother Gene had mentioned Sunday morning, the very fact they'd been over in Persia for some time would made a problem for what? Understanding it. And so hence we have these people helping to understand. Let's move on then. In the next part, I think we went through that Sunday morning. All right, and then the second part here, the people celebrate with joy and feasting. Now remember, when the law has not been read, and people have been, they've not been doing what they should be doing for a long time, and then you have the law read and explained, that typically would make you feel what? Sad. And did it? It did, but because of the time and what was going on, they are encouraged. Look at verses 9 through 12. They're encouraged not to be sad at this point. Brother Richard, if you would, 9 through 12. Yeah, okay, so they're told, hey, this is the 7th month. It's the fall of the year. We need to enjoy and appreciate the blessings God has given, and the fact that what all is going on, the good things that are going on. And so while they are saddened by what they haven't been doing or violations of the law that they were guilty of committing, at this point they are encouraged to do what is in the spirit of the day and the spirit of the tabernacle, Feast of Tabernacle. This day, you'll notice back in verse 9, middle part of the verse. This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn, do not weep, because, why? All the people were. They were weeping, right. And so go, this day is holy, don't be grieved. God is our strength. Hold your peace, the day is holy. And so they do. Well, now we've got the 7th month, and we mentioned this Sunday, that what was, the first day of the month was the blowing of the trumpets, but the 10th day of the month was extremely important. The day of what? Day of Atonement. And it was they were to begin their solemn day actually on the evening of the 9th before, it would be the evening of the day, but it was on the 9th day, the day before, kind of like we'd say a Friday afternoon. People would be getting ready for the Passover to start at the going down of the sun we would say Friday afternoon, and that's when the Sabbath would start. So that was significant, and it's not mentioned here. Likely, I think they probably kept it. They're trying to do everything right. And then we come next to verses 13 through the end, where the Feast of the Tabernacles is kept. And it goes back, we had a chart on this, but let's just read that. Sister Eleanor, go ahead and read the whole paragraph, 13 through the end, if you will. Let me interrupt you right there. Let's all hold our finger in this passage and go back to Leviticus 23. We made a point on this Sunday, and we won't belabor the point. I just want to call attention to the end of the chapter, Leviticus 23, 39. Howbeit on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you've gathered in the fruits of the land, see it's October, November, ye shall keep the feast of Jehovah 7 days. So that's the 15th through the 21st. On the first day there will be a solemn rest. On the 8th day a solemn rest. And then you'll take, the 8th day would be the end of that week. Then you'll take of the fruit of the goodly trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of thick trees, willows of the brook, and do what? Rejoice for 7 days. And ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord 7 days in the year, a statute forever. Ye shall keep it in the 7th month. Ye shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are homeborn in Israel shall dwell in booths. Do any of your translations have any other word besides booths? They were tents. They're kind of arbors, we would say. They were taking the trees' limbs and putting together and make kind of makeshift places. And the reason is given in the last verse, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. So the purpose of this in the fall of the year was it was in the time of the year where they could rejoice because the harvest had been brought in, things were going well, so they rejoiced over that. But then they dwelled in booths or little brush arbors to remind them that's what their ancestors had done when God had brought them out of Egypt. Isn't it interesting? All of these feast days should have reminded them of what? Exactly, Farron, what God has done for you. And most of our national holidays are like that. July 4, Memorial Day, July 4, Labor Day. But with Israel, it was obviously divinely appointed. All right, let's move back now. I want you to notice, and we're going to pick up in Sister Eleanor read verse 15, where the various branches, the olive, wild olive, myrrh, palm branches, thick trees, make booths, as it is written. Well, we just went back to Leviticus 23 to see what was written. All right, so let's see what happens. Sister Eleanor, 16 through the end. All right, and we read that, didn't we, back in Leviticus 23. The 8th day, the first day is a solemn assembly. The 8th day was a solemn. So you remember, most of us, in fact, including myself, most of us are just about too young. Some of you wouldn't be too young to remember 8-day meetings, gospel meetings. Do y'all remember them here? Brother Gene, do you remember the 8-day gospel meetings? They'd usually run from a Sunday to a Sunday. And that was, as far back as I can remember, I think we were still doing that a little bit at Inslee. And, but when I was old enough to know much of that, they started cutting back to Sundays through Saturdays and Sundays through Fridays. I've even heard some meetings actually starting on Monday and ending on a Sunday. And that way it's one more day than a Sunday through Friday, you know. And it gives the fellow who's preaching, if he has to drive very far, gives him a little more time to get back. But anyway, I just say all that to say that 8 days of constant worship, 8 days of constant reading the law is what they were doing here. And they were really, really happy about it. There was great gladness, the end of verse 17 says. So they're on the Lord's page, aren't they? Everything's going well. The wall's been built. They're in the city. And they're eager to hear the word of the Lord. But as they've heard it, though, you know, here's the day that we need to be rejoicing for what the Lord's done for us. When we've heard the law, we know we fail miserably. And so the sin is kind of at the forefront, and I think that's going to lead us on into chapter 9. And why we have this tremendous confession of sin in or sins, national sins, in the prayer that's offered by the Levites here. You look like you wanted to say something.
I remember when the denominational groups up in Walker County when I was a little boy, they would hold 2-week meetings.
Yes.
And they usually brought some singing quartet with them.
Yeah.
Busload of people.
Yeah.
They make a collection every night.
Every night, yes. I have. Most of you, I guess, know I've kind of inherited some of Brother Lewis's things, some of his little cards that he had. Before there's one that caught my attention. There was someplace over towards 77th Street. It's in the Woodlawn area, and on the tent meeting, and it had a beginning date, and it said -indefinite. Indefinite. And what I remember reading is the tent meetings sometimes would be held, and they would continue to preach. He would, and others would continue to preach as long as the interest was good. And sometimes the interest would not. It's almost like the farther along it went, the more interest got. And I think, didn't you tell me one time, Robin, that when you were baptized, when Brother Hedrick was here in a meeting, and actually the elders decided to continue it into a second week? Randy, were you here at the same time? Yeah. Yeah, that everything was going so well that the elders decided, let's just keep it going for a while. Isn't that wonderful? It's just so refreshing to even think about that's been our history, or I say people's history in this area for a long time. Do you remember those days, Randy? Okay. All right. So, yes, sir. You were going to say something? It does, and there's a question on that, Brother Gene, on the word "so." It had not, the children had not done so. with in the manner they're doing it right now. Yeah, because
They were doing it right, it had been done right since they
yes, there had been I've got a note to myself, 1 Kings 8:2 and 65, Ezra 3 verse 4. There were occasions where it's mentioned that they kept the Feast of Tabernacles, but evidently not either the way it should have been kept or with the joy that they have it now. So,
say you're right to the root of that. We got people who came into the promised land,
yes,
started dwelling in houses they had built, reaping from vineyards
that they didn't plant.
eating food they didn't grow.
Yes,
And they're saying, we've had enough of this chance stuff.
yes, yeah. We don't need it. We got good houses. What?
Feast of Ingathering came and hey, we just
It's like, as my dad said, why do you want to go out and live a week in a tent in a campground when you got air conditioning in a motel or in your house? But that's right. That's exactly right. Why would they want to live under a brush arbor when they've got their houses? When they got their houses to live in. Good. Any other comments? Anything? Adrienne, Kirsten, anything? Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, well, earlier they had a mind to work, it mentions. A will to work, a mind to work, and then you have leadership that's really helping you rather than some of those priests who were just, immoral and all kinds of problems. You got Nehemiah as a righteous man, a governor. Ezra he had set his heart to seek the Lord. So you got good leadership. They're interested and you got a good set of people, good crop. It's interesting. Sometimes you can get a generation of people that are just knots on logs. They just don't care. And then you get another generation where you got several who do. That's in schools. I remember when I used to teach, you got to teach a Bible class, and in 1 year it's like you've got 5 or 6 guys who are kind of perceived as leaders, and they're more spiritually minded. And somebody, if they're, I remember, I just tell you, Wes Gossett. You've met Sam Gossett, I'm sure, at Pepper Road. Wes was like that in the class I taught. He was an athlete, he was a leader, and he sat on the front row. And I remember teaching somebody who started misbehaving. Wes was like, hey, the man's talking, hush up. And then he'd turn back around, and they'd fall right in line. And when you'd have that kind of leadership among people, even among the people or among students in the school, it tends to bring the morale, bring the whole spirit of things up. And then you got people who are, nincompoops, and they're knots on logs, and they have a tendency to bring everybody down. And that goes generationally. It goes in schools, goes in churches sometimes. And so they've got everything going on the right score now, right now. Anybody?
I just think the young guy told over and over again how the leadership had failed them.
Yes.
How they had not done what they get to, and then they get here, and it goes back, talking about had a mind to work.
Yes.
Had a heart to work.
Yes.
And when that heart's right, then everything else falls.
It will fall into place. That's exactly right. Well, yeah.
About the Jews, within a 2-year period, they witnessed the plagues in Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
crossing the Red Sea
Right.
on dry land.
Yeah.
They chased the golden calf.
Yeah.
And then they got together and built the tabernacle, and the Lord himself entered that tabernacle, and they watched the cloud
Yeah.
and the fire at night and the cloud over the tabernacle
Yep.
in the daytime. It went 3 days. The first time it moved,
And
began
to murmur.
to murmur against the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's go back and get some leeks. And
Yeah. We like those melons back in Egypt. Yeah.
it's, I mean, a year or 2 years is fresh in your memory.
Yes.
How can you forget an event
Yeah.
crossing the Red Sea?
And we made the point that they had a daily miracle with the manna. I mean, that was daily, regardless of the occasional waters. But you're right.
They wonder about their clothes not wearing out.
Yes, yeah,
It's almost like a spoiled child. They were given so much that they just didn't appreciate it.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And you know, the things that are written aforetime were written for our learning. Yeah, and it's I hope, when I read things like that and what Brother Gene is mentioning, I put myself back there and I think, man, I wish if I had been back there, I hope I would not have been like they were. Like, you know, not everybody was, but you had on a national scale, most were. And
600,000 less 2.
yes,
600,000,
minus 2.
Yeah, minus 2.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so we've got the reading of the law. What I want to do is just introduce it and stop and do this in about 1 or 2 minutes. In chapter 9, it's the longest chapter. It's the longest recorded prayer. And conspicuous by their absences are the names of Nehemiah and Ezra. People seem to have initiated the request for the reading of the law, and it seems to continue here. And the reading of the law evidently brings them to their senses as to their own sins. And obviously Ezra and Nehemiah would have lent their support, but the Levites are the ones who are leading. The time is only a few days following the Feast of Tabernacle, and an additional day for worship, confession of sins, which is not a feast day. They were doing this on their own. This was like, instead of on the Lord's Day when the Lord commands us to eat the Lord's Supper and do certain things, well, we're going to come Monday and sing and pray and have an extra study. That's kind of what that was like. They were enthusiastic in their successes. It's the longest recorded prayer. Interesting that the 9th chapters of Ezra, 9th chapter of Nehemiah, and 9th chapter of Daniel are all prayers confessing national sins as well as requests for God's forgiveness. The Levites trace their history in the prayer by beginning with God's power seen in creation. Then it's the call of Abraham, and it follows with the constant rebellion, God's chastisement of them, but also His abundant mercy and grace, even in the very fact that they are where they are. There's one other thing. In verse 14, he mentions that God gave them the Sabbath on Mount Sinai. Sabbatarians believe that the Sabbath and people honoring the Sabbath day started at creation and is to be eternal. And it's very instructive, very informative in this, in verse 14. And what we'll have to do is let's stop, and we'll get into this a little more. But it's a very instructive passage that puts it into perspective for us and for anybody we want to teach. That the Sabbath was not intended to be eternal or forever. Part of it, but it was given on Mount Sinai, not to Noah, not to Abraham, and it was given for basically a national holiday to remind them of their history. It'd be like saying Germany needs to celebrate July 4. You know, well, July 4 means nothing to Germany. It means something to us, and that's what was significant there. Comment, question, anybody? Okay, we'll stop here.